Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet and today we'll be looking at the mind-controlling Mind Flayer, Nihiloor. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what commanders you can vote for in the comments for an upcoming episode. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Nihiloor is a 3/5 horror that costs 2, a white, a blue, and a black with the following abilities. When Nihiloor enters the battlefield, for each opponent, tap up to 1 untapped creature you control. When you do, gain control of target creature that opponent controls with power less than or equal to the tapped creature's power for as long as you control Nihiloor. Whenever you attack with a creature an opponent owns, you gain 2 life and that player loses 2 life. So Nihiloor is sporting a mid-size CMC, a defensive stat line, and a pair of abilities that are geared towards taking control of our opponent's creatures and using them to our advantage. Taking a look at his first ability, it simply allows Nihiloor to grab between 1 and 3 of our opponent's creatures depending on our board state. At worst, tapping himself to grab a creature of power 3 or less when he ETBs, but really shining if he can grab 3 creatures in one fell swoop. The issue, however, is that he is limited to the power of the creatures we control when he ETBs, so truly massive creatures may be out of his range, which does somewhat limit his selection of targets. His static ability, however, is the part that I'm more excited about, as it allows us to get even more value out of the creatures we manage to snag from our opponents, draining their life and bolstering our own every time we swing in with one of their creatures. Adding insult to injury is not only we have stolen their creature, but it's slowly killing them and making us stronger in the process. So clearly Nihiloor's all about theft, incentivizing us to steal our opponent's creatures and turning them against their former masters, which, to be fair, is appropriate for a Mind Flayer and will be exactly what this build aims to do. That means we'll be running a multitude of theft effects as our bread and butter, allowing us to grab the most powerful creatures on board and use them against the very players that summon them, all while our commander slowly drains their life away as they do so. But it just won't be creatures on the field that have to worry about being taken, as we'll also be running plenty of means to take creatures directly from our opponent's hands, library, and even graveyard, ensuring that nowhere is safe from our commander's influence. But it seems our mind control magics don't come cheap, as many of our spells are quite mana intensive, meaning we'll need to run plenty of mana sources in order to make sure we can cast them reliably. Not only that, but we'll need to put special emphasis on generating mana of every color to ensure we can cast the spells we steal from our opponents, as not all of them allow us to cast them for free. So let's show our opponents how easily we can subvert their influence, turn their allies against them in life and even death, and remind them why they should fear the Illithid race. Or, just steal their stuff and beat them to death with it. So now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Skipping to the CMC 3 slot, we'll start off with a pair of Spectres with Thief of Sanity and Nightveil Spectre. Thief of Sanity is a 2/2 flyer that, when it deals combat damage to a player, has us look at the top 3 cards of their deck, exile 1 face down and discard the rest, allowing us to cast the exiled card so long as it remains exiled and spend mana as though it were mana of any color to do so, giving us a cheap evasive body that not only lets us cast our opponent's creatures, but even sets up their graveyard for us to take advantage in the later game, with the added bonus to even let us cast the exiled card if Thief of Sanity leaves play. Nightveil Spectre is a 2/3 flyer that, when it deals combat damage to a player, has them exile the top card of their library and allows us to play it, giving us less of a selection than Thief of Sanity and not allowing us to cast the exiled card once Nightveil Spectre leaves play, but does allow us to play any lands we hit off the effect. Then last in this slot we have Burnished Heart, a 2/2 that we can pay 3 and sack to put 2 basic lands from our deck into play tapped, making it a reliable source of land ramp to help us get to our bigger spells quickly. The CMC 4 slot is up next with some cards that let us cast our opponent's spells with Dragon Necromancer, Hostage Taker, and Gonti, Lord of Luxury. Dragon Necromancer is a 4/4 that exiles our opponent's creatures as they die with an ice counter on them, allowing us to play cards exiled with these counters and spend mana from snow sources as though they were mana of any color to do so, making it a decent source of graveyard hate as well as a means to recast our opponent's dead creatures back under our control. Hostage Taker is a 2/3 that exiles a creature or artifact when it ETBs until it leaves play and allows us to cast it, spending mana as though it were mana of any color, giving us some removal with a delayed theft effect that has the benefit of hitting artifacts as well if we need it to. Gonti is a 2/3 with Death Touch that, when it ETBs, has us look at the top 4 cards of an opponent's library, exiling one of those cards face down and sending the rest to the bottom of their deck in a random order, allowing us to cast the exiled card and spend mana as though it were mana of any color to do so, giving us yet another means to cast cards from our opponent's deck and, like Thief of Sanity before it, still allows us to cast the exiled card even if Gonti is removed. Then we're also running Keru Spell Snatcher, a 3/3 with Morph for 4 and double blue that counters a spell when it turns face up, exiling it and allowing us to cast it for ourselves without paying its cost, providing both protection and a surprise way to steal an opponent's big creature or spell at instant speed. Then we close out this slot with some proper theft effects with Thalakios Deceiver and Sower of Temptation. Thalakios Deceiver is a 1/1 with Shadow that allows us to sack it if it's attacking and unblocked to take control of a creature permanently, a condition we can easily meet due to it being effectively unblockable thanks to Shadow, and provides us with some potent non-conditional creature control. Sower of Temptation is a 2/2 flyer that gains control of target creature when it ETBs so long as it remains on the field, providing us with a simple theft effect with an evasive body that we can use to get in for additional damage. The CMC 5 slot is up next, starting with a pair of theft effects with Mind Flayer and Beguiler of Wills. Mind Flayer is a 3/3 that takes control of target creature when it ETBs as long as we control it, giving us yet another simple theft effect on a body that we can use to grab another creature alongside our commander. Beguiler of Wills is a 1/1 that we can tap to take control of a creature with power less than or equal to the number of creatures we control, making it a repeatable source of permanent creature theft that just keeps getting better as we summon and steal more creatures. The latter half of this slot then gives us a pair of creatures that allow us to cast our opponent's spells with Fiend of the Shadows and Haven Gull Lich. Fiend of the Shadows is a 3/3 flyer that, when it deals combat damage to a player, exiles a card from their hand and allows us to play it so long as it remains exiled, combining an evasive body with the means to rip cards out of our opponent's hands and use said cards against them. Though sadly we still need to pay the correct mana costs to do so, which our mana rocks and certain lands help smooth out somewhat. Haven Gull Lich is a 4/4 that lets us pay 1 to allow us to cast target creature from any graveyard for the remainder of the turn, the Lich gaining its activated abilities until end of turn if we do so, giving us a cheap means to cast our opponent's cards and even our own out of the bin, along with doubling up on any nice activated abilities that they may possess. The CMC 6 slot then starts off with a trio of creatures that reanimate our opponent's creatures for us with Artikar Valkyrie, Rakshasa Debaser, and Athreos Shroud-Veiled. Artikar Valkyrie is a 4/5 flyer with Vigilance that we can tap to return target creature when it dies back to the battlefield under our control until the end of the turn, apart from itself, making it a repeatable source of reanimation for both our own and our opponent's creatures on a decent evasive body to boot. Rakshasa Debaser is a 6/6 that, whenever it attacks, puts a creature from the defending player's graveyard back into play under our control, and has Encore for 6 and double black, giving us a big beefy body with a repeatable reanimation effect that we can Encore back for up to 3 more creatures later. Athreos is a 4/7 enchantment creature with Indestructible that's not considered a creature unless our devotion to white and black is 7+, and on each of our end steps puts a coin counter on target creature, returning that creature back into play under our control should it die, serving as both another means to reanimate both our and our opponent's creatures while being difficult to deal with itself. Last in this slot, we have Kaiga the Tidestar, a 5/5 flyer that takes control of target creature when it dies, providing us with a big evasive body that steals the biggest threat on the board when it's finally dealt with. Finally, we come to the CMC 7 slot, and our last trio of creatures with Agent of Treachery, Sepulchral Primordial, and Thieving Amalgam. Agent of Treachery is a 2/3 that, when it ETBs, gains control of target permanent and, on our end step, draws us 3 cards if we control 3 or more permanents we don't own, making it a good permanent theft effect and a potent theft payoff that synergizes well with our game plan for additional card advantage. Sepulchral Primordial is a 5/4 with Intimidate that, when it ETBs, reanimates a creature from each of our opponent's graveyards under our control, putting up to 3 of our opponent's biggest threats back on the board from their bins while sporting a decently big stat line itself. Thieving Amalgam is a 6/7 that, on each of our opponent's upkeeps, manifests the top card of their deck under our control in addition to causing the owner of any creature we control but don't own to take 2 damage whenever it dies, gaining us 2 life as well, working nicely alongside our commander to keep our board state packed with our opponent's creatures and having them take damage both when they swing in and when they die. That covers all our creatures, so let's move on to our instance. Skipping to the CMC 2 slot, we have 2 removal spells with Despark and Fracture. Despark exiles a permanent with CMC 4 or greater, making it a flexible removal tool to deal with many of our opponent's bigger threats. Fracture destroys an artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker, giving us another flexible removal tool to deal with a variety of back row threats. The CMC 3 slot then gives us another pair of removal spells with Generous Gift and Mortify. Generous Gift destroys a permanent and gives its controller a 3/3 to replace it, making it a staple source of removal to deal with almost any type of threat with very little downside. Mortify destroys a creature or enchantment, giving us a more flexible removal to deal with 2 relevant types of threats. Some draw and utility then close out this slot with Diviner's Portent and Esper Charm. Diviner's Portent is an X spell that has us roll a d20, adding the cards in our hand to the result. On a 1 through 14, we draw X cards, and on a 15+, we scry X then draw X, making it a decent instant speed source of card draw with the occasional scry attached if we get lucky. Esper Charm either has us destroy an enchantment, draw 2 cards, or have target player discard 2 cards, giving us a good combination of draw, removal, and hand disruption to use in a variety of different situations. Finally reaching the CMC 4 slot, we come to our last instant with Fact or Fiction, which has us reveal the top 5 cards of our deck, having an opponent of our choice sort them into 2 different piles, and having us choose one pile to put into our hand while sending the other to the grave, providing us more card advantage at instant speed to net us between 2 to 3 cards on average. That covers all our instants, so let's move on to our sorceries. Skipping to the CMC 2 slot, we start off with a couple of X spells with Entrancing Melody and Extract Brain. Entrancing Melody is an X spell that lets us take control of target creature of CMC X or less, making it a permanent theft effect provided we have enough mana to pump into it for bigger targets. Extract Brain is another X spell that has target player reveal X cards from their hand, allowing us to cast one of the revealed spells for free, giving us a means to get information, stripping a card from their hand, and immediately playing it against them all in a single swoop, all while being a huge flavor win as well. Then we close out this slot with Sign in Blood, which simply has target player draw 2 and lose 2 life, making it a stable card draw spell for us with burn potential for our opponents if we need it. The CMC 3 slot then gives us even more draw with Painful Truths, Read the Bones, and Pilfered Plans. Painful Truths draws us X cards and loses us X life, X being equal to the amount of different colors of mana spent to cast it, easily allowing us to draw 3 off of it for a fantastic rate. Read the Bones has us scry 2, draw 2, and lose 2 life, giving us a simple but effective combination of card selection and card advantage for a negligible life cost. Pilfered Plans has target player mill 2 while we draw 2, again making it a decent draw spell with the bonus of setting up our opponent's graves further with additional reanimation targets for later. Closing out this slot, we have Lullmage's Domination, an X spell that gains control of target creature of CMC X or less and costs 3 less if the target's controller has 8 or more cards in their grave, adding another Theft X spell that we can get a hefty discount on as the game progresses. The CMC 4 slot is up next, its 2 blue entrants being Concentrate and Mass Manipulation. Concentrate simply lets us draw 3 cards for some no-frills straightforward card draw. Mass Manipulation is a double X spell that allows us to gain control of X creatures or planeswalkers, providing us with an AoE theft effect with the upside of being able to grab walkers, especially if our opponents were kind enough to build up their loyalty for us. Reaching the CMC 5 slot, we have a trio of board wipes with Cleansing Nova, Rout, and Winds of Wrath, all of which can destroy all creatures, the first giving us the option to destroy all enchantments and artifacts instead, the second preventing creatures from regenerating and being castable at instant speed for an additional 2, and the last also preventing regeneration and dodging any enchanted creatures to work nicely alongside our theft auras, giving us an efficient suite of board wipes to blow up the board reliably. Then we end this slot with Dance Macabre, which has all players sack a creature and then has us roll a d20, adding the toughness of the creature we sacked to the result. On a 1 through 14, we can return up to 1 sacked creature this way back into play under our control, and on a 15+, we instead return up to 2 creatures, making it a decent edict removal effect that gets us at least 1 body back afterwards. Finally, reaching the CMC 6 slot and our last sorcery, we have Command the Dread Horde, which allows us to choose any number of creatures and planeswalkers from all graveyards and put them into play under our control, dealing damage to us equal to their total CMC, giving us a superb mass reanimation spell that puts to use the life gain our commander provides us with once the bins are nice and full. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. Skipping to the CMC 3 slot, we have its only entry with King Narfi's Betrayal, a saga whose first chapter mills all players for 4, then exiles a creature or planeswalker from their graveyard. Its second and last chapter then allowing us to cast the exiled cards and spend mana as though it were mana of any color to do so, providing us with more means to cast our opponent's creatures and to further set up their graveyards to use later. The CMC 4 slot then brings us a trio of theft auras with Control Magic, Abduction, and Soul Ransom, all 3 gaining us control of target creature, the first having no other effects, the second returning the enchanted creature back to its owner's control if it dies, and the last allowing any opponent to discard 2 cards to destroy it, allowing us to draw 2 cards when they do so, giving us a decent suite of low CMC theft spells with minimal downside. We're also running Domestication, another theft aura that gains us control of the enchanted creature, but is destroyed on our end step if the power of the creature is 4 or greater, limiting its targets if we want to keep the enchanted creature, but still working nicely to steal low-powered high CMC bodies. Additionally, we're running Greed in this slot, which allows us to pay a black and 2 life to draw a card, again making use of our commander's life gain to mitigate the life we pay for this repeatable source of card advantage. The CMC 5 slot then gives us another trio of theft auras with Corrupted Conscience, Mind Control, and Persuasion. Again, all 3 gaining us control of the enchanted creature with no downsides, and the first even granting the enchanted creature Infect as well, making it particularly nasty when stealing big or evasive bodies. All 3 serving as standard theft effects with no further limitations attached. Moving into the CMC 6 slot, we have its single entry with Enslave, another aura that lets us control the enchanted creature and additionally burns its owner for 1 on each of our upkeeps, adding a bit more damage on top of what our commander will be doing to them as a small bonus. Finally, reaching the CMC 7 slot, we have our last enchantment with Debtor's Knell, which, on our upkeep, puts a creature into play from any graveyard under our control, making it a potent source of continual reanimation turn after turn for both our opponents and our own creatures. That covers all our enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. It's mana rocks all the way down this time around, the CMC 1 slot leading us off with Soul Ring, which taps for 2 colorless, and we run because we're not in green, we're playing Commander, and for the insane amount of early mana it provides. The CMC 2 slot further expands our rock collection with Arcane Signet, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Azorius Signet, Dimir Signet, and Orzhov Signet, all of which we can pay 1 and tap to generate 2 out of 3 of our respective colors, Filwar Stone, which taps for any mana an opponent's land would be able to produce, and Prismatic Lens, which taps for a colorless, or we can pay 1 and tap to generate a mana of any color. Finally, the CMC 3 slot brings us the biggest rocks in our collection, starting with Commander Sphere, which we can tap for any color in our commander's color identity and sack to draw a card, Component Pouch, which we can tap to roll a d20, putting a single component counter on it on a roll between 1 and 9, and 2 on a roll between 10 and 20, which we can later tap and remove to generate 2 mana of different colors, Coalition Relic, which taps for any color, or we can tap it to put a charge counter on it, removing all counters from itself on our first main phase to generate a mana of any color, and finally Skyclave Relic, which is indestructible, taps for any color, and we can kick it for 3 to create 2 tapped copies of it when it ETBs. All these rocks will give us the mana we need to ramp our way to our bigger spells, and the mana outside our colors for effects that allow us to cast our opponent's spells, but don't let us spend mana as though it were mana of any color to do so. Now with the artifacts covered, and since we have no planeswalkers in this build, we'll skip straight to our land base. Starting with our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity, Exotic Orchard, which taps for any mana an opponent's land would be able to produce, Choked Estuary, Port Town, and Shine Shadow Snarl, all which come into play tapped unless we reveal a land of the mana they would be able to produce from our hand, and tap for 1 out of 2 of our colors, Prairie Stream and Sunken Hollow, both of which come into play tapped unless we control 2 or more basic lands, and tap for 1 of 2 of our respective colors, Caves of Kolios, which taps for a colorless, or instead a white or black if we take a damage, Arcane Sanctum, which comes into play tapped and taps for all our colors, and finally Temple of Deceit, Temple of Enlightenment, and Temple of Silence, all of which come into play tapped, tap for 1 of 2 of our colors, and scry 1 when they ETB. Lastly, we're running 4 plains, 11 islands, and 9 swamps as our basics to fill out our land base. Now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 21 creatures including the commander, 7 instants, 14 sorceries, 11 enchantments, 11 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 18 cards that can steal our opponent's creatures outright, 11 cards that allow us to cast our opponent's spells from either their hands, deck, or graveyard, and 7 cards that can reanimate our opponent's creatures under our control, providing us with a multitude of different ways to acquire our opponent's creatures both on and off the board to maximize our commander's influence on the board state. For general deck stats, we have 12 ramp sources, 11 card draw sources, 26 targeted removal sources, and 3 board wipes, giving us a much higher amount of targeted removal than standard due to the amount of theft effects we run, but keeping our ramp, draw, and wipes at typical numbers. Looking at our mana curve, we have 1 1-drop, 11 2-drops, 16 3-drops, 14 4-drops, 12 5-drops, 6 6-drops, and 4 7-drops, making this a mid to late game deck that wants to ramp hard in the early game to get us to 4+ mana as soon as possible to get our theft effects online, and maximize the potency of our commander's effects once he hits the board. Currently, this deck is valued at $65.02, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For some side grades, there are some other theft effects that warrant consideration. Myrick Rebury is a potent one, for example, that even destroys the controlled creature if she becomes untapped or removed. Blatant Thievery is a great top-end AoE theft effect that takes the best permanent from each opponent. And Evangelize is a cute white theft effect with buyback that can see some repeated use if the game goes long. More cards that allow us to cast our opponent's creatures are also good options to swap in. Silent Blade Oni, for example, is a hefty body that we can sneak in on a discount thanks to its ninjutsu and lets us steal a card from our opponent's hands. Telement Performance is a nice way to dig through our opponent's deck for a creature, but can be very random. And of course, Centripolis is an incredible source of theft, but runs the risk of losing you some friends due to the utter oppressiveness of its effect. For upgrades, Thada Adel Acquisitor lets us pick on any blue players by stealing their artifacts and artifact creatures for ourselves. Mind's Dilation is a great way to get free spells as our opponents cast theirs. Praetor's Grasp lets us search our opponent's deck for any creature we want and put it into play later. Royal Elemental gives us a reoccurring theft effect as we make our land drops. Dragonlord Solumgar is a decent theft effect on a big evasive body. Empress Galena gives us the option to continually and permanently steal our opponent's commanders. Expropriate gives us an extra turn and 3 permanents from our opponents. And Bribery simply lets us search our opponent's deck for their best creature and puts it into play working for us. Finally, if you're part of the 1% and the reserve list is no limitation, you may find that Preacher is another good theft effect on a body in white. Treachery is effectively a free theft effect due to it untapping the lands spent to cast it, and Gilded Drake is one of the best theft effects around for only 2 mana. The combined $600 price tag for these being no issue for you as it would be for us mere mortals. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Firstly, I'd like to thank all my subs for getting the channel to its 1K milestone. Truly, this would not have been possible without all of your support, and I could not be more grateful. I'd also like to go ahead and give a special shout out to some people in specific who made this all possible. Caprac for assisting weekly on overviewing builds and offering insight, Rollhard6s for providing art for both the channel banner and the icon as well as assisting in playtesting builds, and Booja for also helping with playtesting. Also, the Reddit community has been very kind and supportive for all my content, and I owe them quite a bit for having helped the channel get to this point. And there's a bunch of other people who have assisted in one way or another to help this channel grow, so I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all of them, as well as to you the viewer. Thank you all for your support so far, and I hope to continue to rely on your continued support. So now that the thanks have been taken care of, let's move on to the results of last week's poll. It appears that the crowd favorite Wolfgar has easily taken this one in a landslide, so prepare to see some attack trigger shenanigans in next week's build with him. Moving on to the next poll, since we've been switching out our polls every week with new entrants, we're going to go back to revisit some of our second place entrants and give them a second chance. That means this week's poll will be featuring Tognar Demonfang Knoll, Driz Duerden, and Storvald Frostgiant Jarl. Let me know in the comments which of these silver medal winners you'd like to see a deck tech on in an upcoming episode. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.